Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Now, before I go any further with this video, let me stop and state two very important things for the record. Number one, I am not in favour of Donald Trump's executive order on immigration and refugees. I don't think this is a particularly well thought out idea. For me, it just feels too reactionary, it feels rudderless, and it also feels like it actually should be part of, as well as being much better thought out, it feels like it should be part of a combined effort to both address terror threats and also to do something at the same time for genuinely vulnerable refugees and others from those regions who need help and support. It just sort of seems weird to have this reactionary, we're going to shut something down without actually seeming to want to address the real issues that do exist in those nations. The second thing I want to state for the record though is this: I can't actually believe that I'm making this video. I have been astounded by the level of unhinged hysteria that I have seen in the media, on social media, in comment sections from people ever since Donald Trump announced his executive order on immigration and refugees coming from these 7 nations. There have been people comparing him to Hitler. This is absolutely absurd. I even saw one piece of commentary that suggested that he was orchestrating another Kristallnacht. This is just crazy. This is not rational thought. This is just people who are acting based on emotive impulse. They're not really thinking about what they're saying. They're not looking at the evidence that's in front of them. So let's look though and compare the president to Hitler, because this is the big thing that I want to focus on. These claims that Trump is another Hitler. So the first one is he was a charismatic speaker who could throw slogans out there and really get crowds whipped up into a frenzy. Does the president tick that box? Well, yes, he does. He does tick that box. Number 2, Adolf Hitler held big public events which drew large crowds, and these crowds tended to show a sycophantic devotion, and they would often chant things and slogans and concepts and other things, and there was almost like a sort of a mindless sycophantic devotion. Does the president tick that box? Well, yes, he ticks that box. Number 3. Adolf Hitler wrote his own memoirs before he had taken power and taken control of the German nation, and before he'd really done much of anything of any great note. And he used those memoirs as a tool to advance himself in the political arena. So does the president tick that box? Well, yes, the president does tick that box. And lastly, large numbers of people are deported out of Germany under Hitler's reign. Does the president tick that box? Well, yes, he does tick that box. Now, actually, before I go any further, let me just stop for a second, because probably some of you are thinking that I'm talking about President Trump. I'm actually not. I'm talking about President Obama. President Obama ticks all of those boxes. All of them. He was a charismatic deliverer of speeches. He could really give a speech and get a crowd going. Absolutely no doubt. That was one of his great skills. Number 2, he held public events which drew massive crowds, and the people there showed almost sycophantic devotion, and they would cling to these concepts such as hope and change. In fact, satire websites like The Onion were making fun of the sycophantic devotion of a lot of Obama voters back in 2008 when he was first elected. Number 3, just like Hitler, Barack Obama wrote his own memoirs before he had taken power in the US, and he used those memoirs as a political tool to advance himself and to advance his cause. It was a tool of self-promotion. And lastly, just like Adolf Hitler, Barack Obama is associated, in fact, in the history of America, he has deported more people from America than any other president. 2.5 million people have been deported by Barack Obama. 2.5 million. More than any other president in US history. He actually broke the record for that. But here's the really important point. Barack Obama is not, never was and never will be, certainly not as far as I'm aware, Hitler. He's not Hitler. Just because he shares certain similarities, or there are things that you can point to and you can make more than one even comparison between him and Hitler, that does not make him Hitler. It's really irrational to do this, just like it's irrational to suggest that Trump is orchestrating his own Kristallnacht. That's absolute insanity. if you are going to talk about Hitler, you've got to understand Hitler in the context, not just what he did, but in the context of the nation in which he rose to power and the cultural context in which he took power. And you've got to understand, because really people are comparing him on the whole, the immigration thing and the treatment of Jews, and they're trying to make comparisons around Mexicans and Muslims now. But if you're going to do that, you've actually got to consider the truth about Hitler, not just cherry pick the bits you want and then try and make an absurd case that really is irrational and hysterical to try and claim that Trump is the new Hitler. Hitler's ideology and hatred for the Jews was just that, an ideological hatred that ran very deep. And it wasn't just about an issue of immigration or border security. For him, the Jews were responsible for the majority of Germany's woes. They were the one single cause. That is not what Trump is proposing here at all. Trump has never said Muslims are the reason America is not great. He's never said Muslims are the reason our economy is a mess. He has never said that Muslims are the reason why we are now a disgraced nation or why we have lost wars. Yet these are all the very types of things that Adolf Hitler did. There's a huge difference here between a president who says that there are certain nations that pose a threat to us because of the threat of Islamic terrorism, which is a real thing, by the way, and a lunatic like Adolf Hitler who blames an entire race of people for all of the woes in the world and claims that they are inferior subhumans, and then goes about enacting policies based on that ideology. That is nothing like Donald Trump. So why do people do this? Well, I think it's quite simple, actually, because I think there is a real dangerous trend in our society at the moment of ego-driven narcissism and faux activism, which unfortunately is one of the downsides of social media. It drives people to do things they think are activism that are not real activism because they don't really cost you anything. They don't really involve any sort of commitment or self-sacrifice. They're not really activism. It's just virtue signaling or throwing a few status updates and rants and raves and into the social media ether. And there's also that ego-driven narcissism that social media tends to drive, people to try and make themselves look and feel and sound important on social media. Now, here's the thing. If Trump is Adolf Hitler, your political opponent, if the guy that you didn't vote for is Adolf Hitler, then guess what? Your views about Trump are no longer just mere political opinions. They have now been elevated to profoundly important truths that are incontrovertible about this great evil. You are now saying that you effectively are a resistance fighter against one of the greatest evils that the world has ever known. If you elevate Trump up the way to being a Hitler or the next Hitler. And that's very appealing to our ego. We like being a superhero, right? Our own superhero in our own story. And that feeds that kind of narrative. And so it's very appealing. It also means that your social media updates and your tweets and things are no longer just, you opining on social media. They are now profound and important acts of activism. They are you showing to the world that you are one of the insightful and good prophets who saw the evil storm coming and stood there as a voice raging against it when no one else would, right? And you can do all of this amazing and profound and important activism without ever having to leave your couch or even switch off your Netflix. It's not activism, and Trump is not Hitler, so your opinions remain just that. They're opinions, they're disagreements. They are not profound statements of resistance and incontrovertible truths. And when we admit that our opinions are just opinions, it sort of is a bit of an ego blow to us if we are sort of used to the idea of always being right. And it is a real ego blow to us to have to accept that what we're doing is not really activism, it's just throwing ideas out there on Facebook. I mean, that's what this video is. It's just me sharing my views, right? Take it or leave it. This is not an important moment of activism. This is just me sharing ideas and trying to engage in a conversation. That's the extent of what this is. So to finish with, why is this a bad idea though? What is the problem with people, especially Christians, I've seen doing this, comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler? Well, obviously there is the problem of the fact that this is probably the worst way that you could slander another person. Particularly a world leader, this is probably the worst way that you could slander a world leader, a political leader, would be to suggest that they are another Adolf Hitler and they are orchestrating, as one commentator suggested, a new Kristallnacht. That's about as serious and heinous and ugly an attack on another person, as you can really get. So there's that problem. Secondly, and this is, I think, a really big issue, there are going to be plenty of moments when Trump needs to be legitimately critiqued and challenged. But if you have started off in the first week of his presidency by going into this full hysterical mode and comparing him and actually calling him another Hitler, you are like the boy who has cried wolf. You know that story of the boy who came into the village and said, "There's a wolf," and there was no wolf. And then, let's say 6 months down the track or 6 weeks down the track, and Donald Trump does something that actually does need to be critiqued. When you turn up in the village again and you say, "I've seen tracks in the forest that are wolf tracks. I've seen wolf fur caught on branches. I've discovered a wolf's lair," no one is going to believe you. They're going to say, "You're that hysterical person who was irrationally claiming that he was Hitler just a few weeks or months ago." You are undermining your own credibility. You are undermining your ability to actually be an effective voice of challenge. And the more people that get engaged in this silly hysteria, the more problematic it becomes, because when Trump does need to be challenged, especially if what he is doing is a major ethical violation or it poses serious risk to individuals or to groups or even the whole world, that's the moment when you are going to need rational, level-headed people who are going to speak boldly on those issues. But if those people are not there because they've already undermined their credibility, our democracy and individuals or groups are going to suffer as a result. So if you're comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, you need to stop it. You need to stop doing that very thing. It's hysterical and it's irrational, and it is undermining our ability as a collective to actually be able to correct him if and when the time comes. And I'm pretty confident there will be a time when we will need to correct errors related to this presidency and people will need to speak up. But your actions are actually undermining that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.